Dave Randall returned for our last in this mini-series, and the title is Reflection on Modern Life and Motivation. Now, I wanted Professor Dave Randall to come for this interview in particular because he has a lot of experience, and if you are a student or if you're a teacher as well, I think there comes a point in your life where your kind of motivation kind of dips. So that's why I wanted Professor Dave Randall to come back. So welcome back, Professor.
Hello.
Right.
Happy to be here.
Great. It was nice to see you again. And I think we were just talking before that the second video which I've published just recently, that's been the highest performing video. So so my viewers are enjoying this content. So that's really good going.
Yeah.
So Dave, what made you go into sociology when you first started?
It's a very good question, and I'm not sure I know the answer. I do know when I left, I didn't do sociology at school. In those days, there was no sociology at school. There wasn't any sociology A level. I did history, economics, and politics at school at A level. Went to university to do economics. And did economics for a year, and discovered in the first year at university that I was doing exactly the same course, exactly the same syllabus as I'd done at A level, and that was extremely boring. And so I switched to sociology in my second year. I switched to sociology because I thought it would be interesting. And hey, in those days, this is the late 1960s we're talking about, I have to say it was also cool to be a sociologist. And so I did my first degree was in sociology. Got to be entirely honest, it wasn't a very good degree. I got a 2-2. But that's a lot to do with my own immaturity at the time. Went from there to be a school teacher. It was some years as a school teacher before I started to teach sociology. I actually, early on in my career, I taught art, and I taught English, and I taught history. And then the opportunity was there to teach sociology at O level in the first instance. Back in those days, it was O level. And then, of course, as students passed through, then it was open to me to teach A level as well, which I did, and I probably did that for 10, 12 years, I guess.
And did you teach O level sociology as well?
I did, yes, yeah.
Because my uncle was telling me that he studied O levels when he was in school, and he was saying they're very difficult. And I saw a program on, I think it was on Channel 4, where they got students who did GCSEs who had got like, I think, A's and A stars, and they got them to sit the old O-level papers, and they're getting like D's, E's, F's.
Yeah, there's a degree of truth in that, I think, some truth in it. I don't necessarily think that the curriculum is any easier today than it used to be. But of course, the grade boundaries can change. And I suspect, at least in some subjects, that's what's happened. The grade boundaries have shifted. So it's become easier to get the higher grades, as it were, the A's and the A stars, as compared to 40 years ago, 50 years ago in my case. But I'm not entirely convinced that the curriculum was different. I certainly think A-level was very difficult. A-level sociology, when I taught it, was very difficult for students. You were expected to have a quite considerable level of knowledge. And to an extent, at least, you're expected to read some original sources. And I don't imagine today that you are. I actually think this is true even of undergraduate work now, that most of the time people don't read original sources now, they read textbooks. Yeah. And the textbooks are very good. I mean, don't misunderstand me. Some of my very good friends, like Dave Francis, are responsible for these textbooks. They are good textbooks, but that kind of development of what sociologists like to call critical thinking, I don't think you get that from textbooks. I think that you get that to some extent from self-questioning. Do I really believe this stuff? And if not, why not? And that's something you get from reading the original sources and seeing where the errors are, so to speak.
And Dave, because you've taught a variety of subjects prior to going into sociology, do you think that helps in terms of being able to cross-reference and relate to other disciplines in terms of your ability to see things from different perspectives and also to critically think as well about things?
Not directly, no. I can't say that I've ever really, for instance, used what knowledge of history I have in my sociology lessons, as it were, lectures and seminars and so on. But what it did do for me was it made me very interested in the boundaries of sociology. I was always interested in, what is it that sociology can teach us and what can it not teach us? And I certainly taught courses at university about this, courses about, for instance, the question of whether there could ever be a sociology of animals, what a sociology of mental illness might look like, what the relationship between sociology and psychology might be, and so on. So I was very, very interested in what we can call interdisciplinary matters. In some respects, I don't really think of myself as a sociologist. In some respects, all my training, all the way through, including PhD, was sociological. But I'm much more interested in the boundaries than I am in the core discipline. So the standard sociological issues, the issues of race and class and gender and so on, I've never written, in terms of my academic work, I've never written a paper on those themes. My work is all about new technology and human relations, working environments, stuff around marginalization in other cultures, not in the UK, and so on. So it's probably, a lot of my work is probably better called anthropological than sociological. Not that there's a massive difference.
So Dave, because you've been in teaching so long and you have taught sociology, do you think sociology is one of those disciplines which after a while it lends itself to influence you to kind of self-introspect about things when you see what's going on in the world, and you think when you sit back and you think of, introspectively about things for yourself?
I think it would be good if it did, and it does for some people. Sociology likes to think of itself as a critical discipline. I am not always convinced that it is. I think its critique is often all too predictable. But at its very best, when people, professional sociologists and others, try explicitly to provoke and challenge your orthodox way of thinking about things, then that will help you think critically. And God, we need people to think critically. I like to think throughout my academic career, certainly, that I have been mainly interested in trying to show people what the relationship is between ideas and facts, theory and data, and to try to show them without good data there is no good theory, and that a competition between theories, what do I believe in terms of theories, depends on the quality of the data you have, and in one way it teaches you caution. Always be careful about what you think, because you may not have the facts you need in order to draw a valid conclusion about things. And I think far too much of the time people think they know answers before they even know what kind of questions they want to ask. And so the social sciences in general, not just sociology, but the social sciences ought to provide you with the tools to think better, to think more carefully about what evidence looks like and whether you can trust it, and to think more carefully about the ideas that people have, the theories they have, and so on, and whether they are justified.
But Dave, is that like a quantitative way of thinking, though? Like,
No, I wouldn't say so. I think it's true of pretty well any approach you take to the discipline. I mean, because I'm a qualitative sociologist, I'm basically an ethnographer. I do studies of work. What I have learned to do over time is to take people at their word. That is, if I see people behave in a certain way, talk in a certain way, have attitudes of a certain kind, and so on, I'm not interested in telling them that they're wrong to believe these things. I am interested in the way they reason about these things. I'm interested in why they believe the things that they believe. What sociology gives you, though, is the ability to distance yourself from it. You know, anthropologists talk about going native, you know, the error of going native. When you get so into a particular kind of culture or subculture, you become just like them and you lose that capacity to think critically. And I have studied groups of people that I didn't like much. And you wouldn't know it from what I've written about them, because I'm not interested in challenging their beliefs and so on. I'm interested in representing the way they are. But I can still privately think I really don't like this group of people.
David, is that using part of Max Weber's philosophy of, is it called Verstehen?
Verstehen, yeah, it certainly relates to it. Yeah, I mean it stems from Weber. Yes, it's the German word Verstehen just means understanding, and that's what it is. It's trying to understand the point of view of the actor. Yeah. And it's often in the textbooks referred to as putting yourself in the shoes of the actor or in the place of the actor, trying to understand things from their point of view. And yes, I do think that's a large part of what you do when you do qualitative research. Of course, things get a lot more complicated when you are doing qualitative research in very sensitive areas.
Because like Dr. Dave Calvi went undercover as a bouncer, didn't he?
He did, yes.
So, how would he have gone about, do you think, maintaining that distance and with his co-workers?
Well, the short answer is you have to treat what you're looking at as a series of objective social facts, so to speak. They are, objective's not the right word here, but things as they are. You know, no matter what you think about it, they are a certain way. And your job is to represent the way that things are as best you can. So to an extent, you have to dig into the culture in order to be able to do that, in order to be able to understand why people are doing the things they're doing, behaving the way they're behaving. You have to be enculturated to an extent, but that doesn't mean approval. I used to say, I don't know if it's true or not, but I used to say that I felt that I could do a study of an extreme right-wing political group, and at the end of it come out with descriptions of and arguments about why these people think the way they do, even if inside I was thinking I really, really hate these bastards. I would like to think that I could nevertheless study it, have enough distance to be able to study almost anybody.
Is that because it's really, the emphasis is on the process as opposed to outcome, like you were saying, the why, but understanding the process is why someone comes to those judgments, those beliefs?
Yeah, I mean, my own way of talking about these things is to talk about reasoning or rationale, that I want to know what reasons people bring to their behaviors, and what the rationale is for what they do. In other words, through their eyes. I'm not particularly interested in understanding what deep-rooted causes there might be excuse me, for their behavior. I'm interested in what reasons they bring to it, why they think the way they do, the logics they bring to it. I don't have to agree with them. I don't have to believe a single word they say, but that's what I'm interested in. I'm interested in the way that they see their world, behave in it, and so on.
Oh, so I mean, I remember from the criminology modules I studied at uni, we were talking about, reoffending rates are so high, and like the person then makes a decision, like a rational decision. If I get a job, I can earn X amount, but if I do this, I'll get X amount, and the risk of getting kind of caught will be. So they're kind of quite pragmatic in terms of how they weigh things up.
Well, yeah, I mean, this is what we call a rational choice model, and it's applied to a lot of different kinds of behaviour. I'm not a fan of rational choice thinking, mainly because it implies that people actually have the tools to make a good decision about this, and it ignores the fact that we live in a moral universe as well. I remember on the Manchester trams years ago, I remember thinking to myself, you never saw anybody check tickets on the tram. My wife used to drop me off in Eccles because she worked at Eccles College at the time, and I would catch the tram into Oxford Road, top of Oxford Road there, and walk down. And I remember thinking that nobody ever checks the tickets. And then once every 6 months or so, a ticket inspector would get on the tram and check tickets. And if you didn't have a ticket, you got fined, I think, £20. Well, I was doing this journey 7 days a week, or 5 days a week. And if you only get the tickets get checked like once every 6 months, you're quids in if you only get fined that once. And I remember thinking about it and thinking, well, rational choice would dictate that I shouldn't buy a ticket, because the cost to me will be much less than the daily cost of buying a ticket at about £1.80 as it was then, I think. But I didn't do it. I didn't do it because I felt a certain moral obligation here. So I don't think rational choice explains everything, and I don't think it explains all criminal behaviour. Not least because I think, to some extent, at least some of our behaviours, criminal and otherwise, are dictated by emotional reactions. There's a lack of there are lots of reasons for criminality. I don't think any single criminological theory explains everything, but not being able to understand what other possibilities there are is one of them. You're part of a certain kind of life at some point, and it's difficult to see what else you can do. Having said that, as you probably well know, since you are a criminologist, the vast majority of the human population cease to commit anything other than white-collar crimes by the time they're about 25. It's very much a young person's thing. Criminality is very much a young... I used to joke with one of my criminological colleagues that you could solve the problem of crime in this country quite simply by putting every single 16-year-old in jail. And very few crimes would ever be committed. Keep them there until they're 36, and basically there won't be any problems. It was a joke, don't misunderstand. Yeah. But crime is a young person's game.
But do you think that some people were better at kind of concealing it? Like, for example, some politicians, who commit like white collar crime, they maybe have got the resources to conceal their.
Of course they do, yeah, and they probably many white collar criminals probably don't even think of themselves as committing crimes. You look at tax evasion and so on. These people probably, not that I know anybody who is heavily into that kind of game, but probably just think that at worst they're a little bit naughty. They don't see themselves as criminal. I mean, most motorists who commit motoring offences get angry at the point where people start equating them with criminals, because despite the fact they commit crimes, they don't see themselves as criminals. There's an identity element to this, isn't there? Being a criminal is not simply a matter of having committed a crime, because you will know this from your own criminology courses. Everybody's committed crimes at one point or another. The issue is, why is it that some people, as it were, progress into a criminal career of some kind, whereas the rest of us don't? The rest of us stop doing these things at some point and become, to a greater or lesser extent, law-abiding citizens.
So Dave, the second question really in terms of motivation is, because you've had so much experience working in education, what would be your advice to stay motivated? Because you've stayed consistently at the top of your game for years. what would be your advice to me and our audience in terms of if you're a student, you're a teacher, or whatever profession you're in, to stay motivated in what you do?
Oh, it's a really tough one because everybody's different. And of course, your attitudes change over time. If I was looking back at myself, if I was giving advice to myself when I was between, say, 15 and 21, around that age group, my advice now to myself at that age would be, learn some work habits. Learn the ordinary routine ways in which you learn, because it is easy to pretend that you know what you're doing. If you've got any brains, you can kind of surf sometimes without really doing any great amount of work. And I wish I'd had better work habits. I wish I'd been able to concentrate more, sit and read more consistently than I did, show enough discipline to write consistently. I was much more interested in arguing about stuff than I ever was, remembering my age when I was young, than I was in the discipline stuff of writing and reading and so on. And I wish then that I'd had much better work habits. I also wish that I'd been more confident. If I was being entirely truthful, I wish I'd been more confident, because I think a lot of people at that age very much lack confidence. They're not at all convinced they can do things, and that's a demotivating factor. If you're not convinced that you're capable of doing things, you're not going to be highly motivated to try and change it. And I think that's a problem, as it was with my background. I think it's a problem for working class kids. I think it's a problem for a number of kids in relatively marginalized backgrounds. It's easy to compare yourself to the people around you who look much more confident and much more competent than you do. The truth is they're not, by and large. The truth is that most of the time they are no better than you. If you look at sociology of gender, it's well known that women have that kind of constant experience of wondering why it is that men appear to be so competent and confident when actually they're not. They're just very good at portraying themselves that way. And I think it's true for a lot of young people that they don't always appreciate what they are capable of doing. I wish I'd been more confident. I wish I'd had better work habits, and I wish I'd been more sensible in terms of dividing up the fun parts of life and the working parts of life. Yeah.
Did they kind of like all merge together, or they blurred at certain points?
I just knew I always felt that I rather got away with it. At school, I always felt I got away with it a bit. I never felt that I worked especially hard, and came out with some halfway decent A-levels, not brilliant, but halfway decent A-levels, enough to get me into university at the time. And it was pretty much the same at university. I didn't really do much work until quite late on. And there's a combination of factors, as I say, a certain lack of confidence, some laziness, no question about that. I think I was lazy. Not always confident that I knew how to do things. But I got by. I came out of university with a degree. I always felt I was a little bit fortunate, but I did come out with a degree, enough to get me into teaching. Teaching matured me. You learn that you have to take your job seriously. But I don't really think that in academic terms I was mature until my late 30s. I think I learned work habits in my late 30s. I learned how to concentrate. I learned how to read. I learned how to be committed when I did my master's degree.
So Dave, so are you saying that really for advice for people is to have like a good mindset and attitude towards life, and when you do something, commit to it and go all in?
I would say, I'd put it slightly differently. I would say never believe that the people around you are better than you. They are often people who just have a lot more confidence than you. That's not enough. Just not believing that other people are better than you is not enough. You also have to show that you can do what it is that you are attempting to do, and that requires a certain attitude to work. Like it or not, it's very hard for young people to develop that attitude that they need to work. But they do. They need to develop these habits which say every day from Monday to Friday, I'm going to spend, as a student, for the sake of argument, 2 or 3 hours reading. Very few students actually do that. Most students cram at the end of 3 years, as a result of which they don't necessarily develop, I think, the rounded critical thinking that I associate with the social sciences. Some do, of course, but far too few. You will know this yourself, that far too many students go through university worrying only about what the degree classification they get might be. They're not necessarily very interested in what they're being taught. And I think that's a shame. I think one of the work habits that is well worth acquiring is being genuinely interested in the things that you are learning. Genuinely interested in trying to figure out what the arguments are, what the evidence looks like, why you disagree with people. As you become more adept, shall we say, or more experienced in these matters, you become much more able to recognize where people go wrong. And I take a skeptical attitude towards everything I read. My first thought when I read things is, what's wrong with this? And that's both an attitude and an ability that you learn over time. You don't have this right at the start. It's difficult to do until you learn your discipline. And it comes slowly, I think, for a lot of people. And let's face it, if your career doesn't involve academic life, it's not going to matter that much. I don't think, a degree in sociology is not going to do much for you, except for the fact that it's a degree. If you see what I mean, it's not the sociology that gets you the job, it's the degree. And I think it is a pity that people take the view that they're in it for the degree, in it for the qualification. Yeah. I would like to see more people in whatever discipline they are in, taking a genuine interest in what it is they do. And you can only do that with the right work habits. It's impossible without them, because you don't understand enough.
So, would you say work habits go hand in hand with having like a good work ethic as well?
Again, hard to say. I mean, if I think about, what do we mean by work ethic? I mean, for me, this notion of being inner or other directed is one of the kind of psychological divisions that sometimes argued that some people are inner directed. Their motivations come from inside. Other people are motivated by the goodwill of other people, as it were, the good opinion of other people. I think a lot of the time I'm other directed. I want other people to think I'm good at what I do. And I think that's a strong part of my motivation, that I like the appreciation that I get from people, because I can tell when I think that they think that I'm good at what I do. I don't know if that's a work ethic or not. It's a motivation. I don't see work as a good thing in and of itself. I certainly don't. I don't know if you know David Grieber, the anthropologist David Grieber, who wrote a book 2016, I think, called Bullshit Jobs. Yeah. It's quite well known. He died not long ago, died about a month ago. His book is very, very critical of the whole idea of a work ethic. He thinks the work ethic is a 20th century invention, and that it's oversimplifying, but that it's a rather peculiar invention insofar as most of the jobs we do aren't really worth doing, in his opinion. I can't remember all the categories. He has 5 or 6 categories of different kinds of job that are not worth doing. So he talks about categories of people, like box tickers is one example. You know, people who go through the motions. And you're thinking about an awful lot of administrative work, and it is exactly that. It's just box ticking. And then there's kind of, I don't know if it was Grieber or somebody else who once said that half the people who are at work in this country do jobs which mainly involve keeping other people miserable. And there's a degree of truth in that. I mean, I don't see a work ethic in and of itself as worth having. I think the motivation to work should come from your beliefs about the value of the work you do. If you don't believe in the value of the work you do, well, what's the point other than the money? We get paid to do work, well, fine, you know, it enables us to do other things, but I don't really accept the idea that you should work hard just because work is a good thing. I think you should work hard as and when you feel that the work you do is worth doing.
Because, do you know Carol Dweck, Professor Carol Dweck's growth mindset theory? I quite like some of the things which he talks about and I try and use it in some of my teaching, where, you know, if I'm giving my students feedback, I try and encourage them. So, for example, if they do a piece of work, I'll say something like, "Oh, that's a good piece of work. You've worked hard." So I don't say, for example, "Oh, you're brilliant," because try to not to inflate the ego, and then encourage them in the process of working to get that end result. So I quite like that idea of Carol Dweck in terms of kind of motivating people through getting them to work, getting them into good habits of working, as opposed to kind of giving them specific praise. And she talked, I think, about failure as being good, in terms of when people fail, they don't see themselves as a failure. They depersonalize from that situation, saying, "Oh, it's just that piece of work and not me as a person." So I quite liked her kind of spin on it.
Yeah, I mean, from the point of view of teachers, encouragement is always better than discouragement. I mean, it's positive reinforcement. You know, I think everybody believes that positive reinforcement is better than negative reinforcement. And I certainly believe that encouragement is better. I'm not entirely sure that I think that you should limit praise. I think I wouldn't want to go overboard. I wouldn't want to be busily telling students that they're brilliant all the time, because you can always be better. And it's probably a good thing that people realize you can always be better than you are. I mean, I still, at my advanced age, think that I've got more to learn. If I didn't think that, then I'd give up reading and writing and so on. You know, my good friends would not waste any time praising me. They would be critical of what I do most of the time, and it doesn't bother me much.
So Dave, you were saying before that if you were to give advice to yourself when you were in your 20s, it'd be to be more confident within yourself. If you could go back in time and speak to yourself when you're 30, 40 and 50, what advice would you give to yourself? I say this because I've just recently turned 40, so that's kind of where I've got that question from.
Again, I mean, it's not advice in the sense that you can give generic advice to everybody at a certain age. I think the advice you give largely depends on your own experiences. At the age of 30, my advice to myself would be something along the lines of, this is where you are. You either accept this or you do something about it. If you choose to accept it, well, that's up to you. If you don't want to accept it, then you have to investigate ways of escaping from it. I was a school teacher, although I was happy enough as a school teacher. I had begun, after say 10 years of teaching, I had begun to think that there might be other things I could be doing. I think I said to you, I had begun to get a little bit bored. And I made the mistake at that age of, again, partly for reasons of confidence, of not seeing what I could do about it, being a little bit too accepting and deciding wrongly that that was my life. There was nothing else I could do. And I think you have to kind of realize at some point in your career that either this is where you are and this is where you will be, or you're going to make a difference. You're going to change somehow. Realizing that you want to change is only the first step. Actually changing is a whole other thing. But, you know, it's a wood from the trees problem. We get so wrapped up in the day-to-day routines of what we do that we find it really hard to see beyond those day-to-day routines, to see what other possibilities there are, to try to work out whether a risk is worth taking or not, and so on. So many people do jobs they really don't like doing, and they do it for the money. And when you try to figure out, well, what is the attraction of money? A lot of the time, they don't really know. You know, you can live on not that much money. I'm not saying I would prefer to live on less money, but you don't have to have a lot of money. And I certainly have the opinion that doing something you enjoy is a lot more important than doing something that makes you rich. If you hate your job, then the best advice I have is find something else to do if you can. Take a chance, even if it costs you money, even if it costs you other things in your life. Why would you continue? You're looking ahead at the age of 30, you're looking at another 30 years of work, if you're lucky. Why would you accept that you're going to be miserable for the next 30 years? And I think there are too many people who are ground down by routines. This is working life we're talking about, not other aspects of life, but are absolutely ground down by the routines of working life. I feel endlessly privileged because I'm not. Because the 90 to 95% of my working days over a long period of time, I have felt positively about. I've actually wanted to do it. I used to say about working at MMU that it didn't matter to me whether it was Friday or Saturday. If I had certain things to do, then I would do them. And I was completely indifferent to whether it was a Friday or a Saturday. If I felt it needed to be done, then I would do it on Saturday. And I often worked Saturday mornings. On occasion, I'd work a 7-day week if I felt that it was important that I got certain things done. That's a product of actually enjoying the work you do. I would find it very hard to do that if I hated the job.
Because Dave, do you know, because recently I found that, you know, the older I'm getting, the more kind of conscientious I'm getting with my work. And I've been feeling, I know it may sound a bit sad to some people, but excited to plan my lessons, because I've been making videos for my students as well, like, you know, voiceovers, and because of the good feedback, for me, it's like reinforcing what I'm doing is working. So I think I agree in terms of you have to have that kind of desire, don't you, to do what you do, and if you're not happy, then do something else.
I think it's very important. I think when you're young, it doesn't matter so much. You know, when you're young, there are other things in your life besides work, and work probably doesn't matter that much to you. But as you get older, work intervenes more in your life, I think. You need the money more, you know, mortgages and families and all this kind of thing. Money tends to drive your motivations more than anything else. It's at that point you realize that you hate your job. Yeah. And an awful lot of people do. An awful lot of people, if they don't hate their jobs, they really do it only for the money. And I think that's quite sad. I feel privileged because I actually like doing what I do.
So Dave, so if you were to advise a 40 and 50-year-old, you know, what advice would you give 40 and 50? Would it be the same?
Just before 40, at the age of, I think I was 37 when I made my career change. Decided to give up teaching, decided to go and do a master's degree, and took a big chance, really. You know, you give up your salary. I had a mortgage to pay. Gave up my salary and hoped for the best. And it all turned out very well for me. What it taught me is that it's never too late. those possibilities are always there. They diminish over time, no question. It's not as easy as it used to be. Back in the day, MMU was full of mature students, who all of whom were doing something very similar to what I'd done, which is going back into education to see if they could do better than they had done first time round. And most of them, all of them, I think, thoroughly enjoyed that experience the second time round. Their motivations were very different second time round than they were the first time round. Mine certainly were. I really, really worked hard in my master's degree, and I was utterly motivated to do the best I possibly could.
Because Dave, I did a postgrad as a mature student. I mean, I've got a friend who went back to university as a mature student, and we all say the same thing. But when you go back, generally we found that more motivated. I did a lot better on my postgrad than I did on my undergrad, and I was working harder because I was working full time, and I was working at university in the evening, and then I was the family and everything. So I had actually more barriers, but I was more committed and dedicated as a mature student. So I always say to students, think about going back as a mature student even.
I think it's generally true. Apropos of achievement, it connects to what I said earlier on. The people who do well do not do well because they're brighter than you are. They do well because they're more motivated than you are. It's that old illusion that there are people there who are really, really bright and they never do any work and they still do well. It's just not true. The people who do really well do work hard. They may pretend they don't, but they work hard. You could not possibly get a good degree unless it's in maths, which is slightly different, but in any subject that has a knowledge base, a content base, you have to have that knowledge and you have to have that content in order to do well. And it doesn't come from nowhere. It comes from reading. It comes from listening. It comes from working. This idea that there are people who are so brilliant they never need to do any work is just untrue. And I think it a little bit sad that undergraduates are in awe of their teachers. They think that their teachers are brighter than they are. They're not. They just know more.
Because Dave, what I say to my students as well, I say something similar. I say, I'm not brighter. I'm just 20 years ahead of you.
Yeah, experience and knowledge, learning. I've published 7 books and about 150 peer-reviewed papers. And when my PhD students ask me, how on earth did you do that? My answer is usually, look, this is just a craft skill. It's a bit like bricklaying, the more you do it, the better at it you should be. You learn how to craft an article, you learn how to craft a book and so on. The more practice you get, the better you get at it. It's not genius. And I think an awful lot of people just don't practice enough. They just don't realize that the more you do these things, the more essays you write, the better at essay writing you get. And so on. If they don't get great marks first time round, they think they're no good, and that's not an intellectual fault. It's a confidence fault. I'm absolutely committed to that belief. That I don't really believe that any given human being, except right on the margins, is brighter than any other human being. I think that we do well in the education system, or not so well, because of motivation and confidence, not because of brains.
Yeah.
You can learn to be good at almost anything.
So it's just really applying yourself, isn't it?
It is, but applying yourself does depend on things like confidence and determination and so on. It's not a gift, is it? Applying yourself, you have to learn to do it, and you have to have that determination to continue to do it, and to as it were, take the kicks. So, if you have disappointments, you have to learn that this is the opportunity to do better. It's not necessarily easy.
Yeah. So Dave, but as a 50-year-old, would you say there's a big? Would the advice be the same? someone who's, you know, used your 50-year-old?
I think by and large, at the age of 50, things are set.
Yeah.
You know, you're not going to be, as a general rule, thinking about much more than when shall I retire. So I think things are a little bit different, and I think by the time you're 50, for various reasons, including your family commitments and so on, the opportunities you may have had when you were younger will have closed down. Most 50-year-olds are, as they say, set in their ways. Then it becomes a matter of, I think, a degree of planning about what you want to do with the rest of your life. There are certain things I'm rather canny about, and one of them is money. And I realized quite early on in life that I wanted to be absolutely sure that if I really wanted to retire, that I could. So I was always very careful about making sure that I had a decent pension, careful about making sure that my mortgage would be paid off at a certain age and so on, so that if I wanted to go, if I wanted to quit work and so on, I would be able to, and I would live comfortably enough. I do think a degree of planning is a good thing. As it happens, I was, again, very, very fortunate in that I never really wanted to stop work. I was always perfectly happy to carry on. And I always had opportunities. Quite why that is, I'm not sure, but I always had more opportunities. I left MMU. I did actually technically retire from MMU at the age of 60, but it wasn't retirement. It was just leaving one institution. And the reason I did it was because there were payoffs on offer. They were paying a year's salary, in effect, for people over 60 just to go away. And I thought, well, a year's salary is a year's salary, and I can do other things.
Could you have gone back after a year?
No,
Oh.
No, they wouldn't re-employ you.
Because that'd be like a year off.
Well, that's slightly different. You can take sabbaticals.
Yeah.
No, and I never planned to go back. I moved on, and it would be a lie if I were to say that I knew perfectly well exactly what I was going to do when I left MMU. I didn't, but I was always certain that it was not the end of my working life. I was going to do other things. I'm trying to think. In short order, Lancaster University offered me a short-term contract, about a 4-month contract, to do some research work with them, which kind of ticked over for me for a while, kept me in the game. Then I got offered a contract on a commercial basis with a Japanese company that I've talked about before. And that was 2 years of work with them on a consultancy basis. So I had plenty to do, as it were, in that first couple of years. Then I got offered this other job, which is working with a German university on a kind of consultancy basis, which I've been doing ever since. I've been doing that for the past 8 years, I think. And also got offered the opportunity to teach a little bit in Sweden, which I also do. No, I think I keep saying this, I've been extremely lucky because things never closed down for me.
So So from the places you've taught, like like in Sweden and Germany, is it how do you find teaching in those countries? If you could have, would you have gone, maybe you've taught there earlier in your career, having experience teaching there?
No, I had offers in Sweden many years ago. I was offered professorships in a couple of universities there many years ago, and didn't really. The universities I worked in were okay. They were absolutely fine, but they were hard to explain. They were a little bit. I would have felt like a big fish in a very, very small pond. I didn't think that the academic culture was great. Didn't feel that I would have the kind of right intellectual stimulus. So I was happy to work on a kind of consultancy basis rather than work full time. Students, they are pretty much the same as they are in England. The thing I would say about Swedish students is that they're probably not quite so good at the individualistic stuff, the essay writing and so on, but they're an awful lot better at things like group work. their culture right through school and onwards is such that they do a lot more of learning by doing, group work and so on. So it's different in that respect. It's neither better nor worse, it's just different. Germany, I only teach, well, I don't teach, I support PhD students there. Well, PhD students almost by definition are highly motivated. You don't go all the way through to, you know, second and third year in a PhD unless you are motivated. But it was like that in the UK as well. PhD students are always motivated. Again, they can have crises in confidence. I always used to say to my PhD students, you must never ever think that doing a PhD is the hardest thing you'll ever do, because it's not. A PhD isn't really that difficult, in my opinion, but it's very isolating. Most PhD students go through emotional crises rather than intellectual crises. You know, they can cope with the work, but being on their own doing the work and not sure whether they're good enough and not getting enough support and so on, that is a problem that many PhD students have. So it's kind of like an emotional crisis that they go through. And I think that's common with every PhD student I've ever supervised, and I've supervised now 40 or so. Everybody goes through that. And it requires a different kind of support. It's a different kind of relationship than you have with undergraduates and with school kids and so on. A lot of encouragement, a lot of support, a lot of practical help. I do a lot of writing with my students in Germany now. But it's very rewarding. I mean, I really, again, go back to what I said before, I wouldn't do this job, I wouldn't do what I do now unless I liked doing it. The intrinsic motivations to me are much more important than the extrinsic motivations. I get paid for it, and I probably wouldn't do it if I didn't get paid. I kind of believe that you should be paid for what you do, but it's not the most important part of my work. I like it, I enjoy doing it, and I'm not quite sure what I'd do if I didn't do it. You know, that kind of work, that working life is important to me.
Because Dave, I remember, you know, Dr. Paul Kennedy of MMU as well. I mean, I used to call him every now and again, and he just recently, when was it in? I think, well, in April or May, I thought I'll give him a call, and it was just a chance look on the website, and you know, sadly he passed away.
He died a few months ago, yeah.
And I remember he was quite active in the GSA Global Society, wasn't it?
That's right, yeah.
And so I was thinking he retired formally quite, you know, a few years before, but he must have, I think he really enjoyed his subject because he was still.
You'll find that I won't say most, but a lot of academics will simply carry on doing the things that motivated them when they were in full-time work. Colin Barker, I don't know if you remember Colin, yeah. But Colin was the same. He was a Marxist sociologist and politically very motivated, and he carried on being politically very motivated for years and years and years after he gave up full-time work. Colin again died not so long ago. I think it's quite common with academics, and it tells you that they like what they do. They don't like everything about what they do. I mean, universities have changed, and they are much more bureaucratic than they used to be, much more rule-based than they used to be. And academics, by and large, are resentful of that. But it's still the case. Certainly people of my generation, when I talk to my friends who are, roughly speaking, the same age as me, or maybe a little bit younger, they will all end up with pretty much the same phrase. After they finish complaining about various aspects of their work, they always end up saying, mind you, it's better than working for a living. Which is how I feel about it. Yeah, that's what I do is better than working for a living.
Because I think with education as well, I think we're in a fortunate position where you don't know kind of the impact, what you say to someone, what positive impact it has on them, doesn't it? And likewise, if you know, the opposite. But I think we're quite lucky in that respect in terms of it's not, we have got admin to do, but the job itself is actually quite engaging, isn't it? Speaking with people and yeah, communicating.
Absolutely. I mean, you said earlier on that human beings are naturally social animals, which is broadly true, I think. And it's one of the ways in which you can be sociable. I like talking to young people. I like hearing them talk about the things that interest them and so on. It keeps me younger, I think, than I otherwise would be. The last thing I want to do is sit in an armchair drooling. It would be all too easy to be like that, doing nothing but watching TV all day long. I would much rather feel positive about what I do.
Because Dave, I'm sure there must be some research where kind of how you think affects your health, because I remember reading somewhere that there's we have a biological age, but we also have a chronological age as well, and our biological age can be younger than our actual chronological age, and vice versa. So do you think that's why you've kept on going?
I don't know. I mean, I certainly believe that ill health is not entirely caused by biological factors. It'd be silly to argue that it's not caused by biological factors, but I think things like stress, for instance, I think there's pretty good academic evidence that high degrees of stress correlate with ill health. High stress occupations correlate with heart disease, for instance. And it's not that surprising, is it? And again, one of the nice things about the kind of work that I do is that it's low stress. Any stress I feel is usually generated by me. It's usually because I feel a moral need to meet a deadline more than anything else. I feel guilty if I don't meet deadlines. But most of the time, I think I'm stress-free, pretty much stress-free, and that's a wonderful way to be. And it's back to this argument about making up your mind in the end what you want from your life in working terms. Do you want to do a job that pays you a lot of money? Do you want to do a job that you actually like doing? If you can get both, all well and good. But do you really want to end up doing some job that at very best you're completely indifferent to and at worst you hate, just for whatever it is that it pays you? If you can avoid it, avoid it.
Yeah. No, I think that's good advice, because I remember you saying to me once as well, when you're in life, if you can be happy in what you're doing, then that's part of the equation, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, you can get by. Let's face it, that you don't have to be absolutely miserable about what you do. You can just go and do it, and as long as you're stress-free and you can walk away at the end of the day not being worried about aspects of work, well, okay. And I suppose quite a lot of people feel like that. I just feel that for people like me, we are altogether luckier. It's nice to feel positive about what you do.
Yeah.
And pretty well 90% of the time I do. I feel very positive about what I do.
So do you think you have to feel positive as well? Is that one of the solutions? For people of any age, really, just try and be positive.
Well, that's more of a personality question, really. I mean, there are such things as miserable academics. Not everybody likes that work. People can feel like a failure in that work as much as they can anywhere else. I would think of it more as acceptance rather than being positive. If you think about the stages that you go through in your working life, back to this business of advice at the age of 50, my advice would be something like, by now you should be accepting where you are. If you don't accept where you are, your life is a sad one. You're kind of in trouble. If you hate your life at the age of 50, you're in trouble. I would hope that by that time you would have reached some sort of equilibrium. You'd reach some point where you're more or less content with the way your life is.
So Dave, but to kind of reach that equilibrium, how do people sometimes? I mean, I see a lot of students. When they've seen me in the past, they've said, I don't know what I want to do. I may end up just going to university just for the sake of it. What would you say to students who don't know what they want to do? On the.
Well, I wouldn't say anything to students. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I had no clue. I had no positive views about teaching, and it's not as if I went into teaching because I was desperately anxious to be a teacher. I kind of drifted. And I tend to think that within certain confines, certain limits, there are second chances. You know, whatever you choose to do at the age of 20 or 21 is not what you're stuck with for the rest of your life. I do think people tend to, a couple of things, and it's probably not as true today as it used to be. But firstly, it's this wood from the trees thing that people forget about everything other than the routines of daily life. They can't see beyond the routines of daily life. The other thing is kind of getting tied down. People get tied down, or used to get tied down very young, with families, with mortgages and so on. I think today people tend to hold off on that a little bit longer, which is a good thing in my view, because it means you keep your options open longer. And again, my advice always to undergraduates, for instance, was precisely that: keep your options open for as long as you can. You know, the longer you can go without being forced to make decisions, the better. It means that when you do make decisions, it's less likely they will be forced decisions and more likely that they actually will be choices. And I'm a strong believer in that. I'm a strong believer in the idea that if you possibly can, you try to keep your options open. Try to look to what other things might be available in your life until such time as they close down. I think by the age of 50, they have closed down.
Yeah. Because I think, Dave, we all go through the same sort of things in terms of, you know, get a degree, get a job, get a house, you know, get married, have children, all these sort of things. But do you think that people should, I mean, looking back on your life and maybe other people's, your friends, do you think that it should be at different stages, or do you think people should do that?
I think people should do it only because they really, really want to. I think a lot of the time we follow on, as it were. These are things that it's generally assumed you should do. And I think that can cause a level of stress that isn't necessary. I think there's quite a lot of stress there now in the lives of people in their late 20s and early 30s, because career opportunities have closed down now in a way that they hadn't 20 years ago. There are fewer opportunities now for people than there were, I think, 20 or 30 years ago, for reasons of recession, etc. I think there is some truth in the notion of a generational inequality, that my generation, as it were, stole, I don't like saying this, but stole the future from younger people. It's not that people like me deliberately set out to maximize our own benefits at the expense of other people. I certainly didn't, but it is true that people of my generation have been fortunate in comparison to the expectations of younger people. Houses were not that expensive. The first house I bought with my wife, whenever it was, I think cost £18,000, and it was a semi. And the second house we bought, which we live in now, cost us about £60,000, I think. You know, with a mortgage, we didn't have £60,000 lying about. But you know, I'm not bragging about the value of our house, don't misunderstand me. But if we were interested in selling it, we could sell it for more than £500,000. We paid £60,000 for it. Now that's not good judgment. That's not, hey, I was brilliant because I saw the way the housing market would go. It's pure luck. And I see that an awful lot of people who are in the housing market now, or trying to get into it, won't have that luck, because prices are already very, very high and salaries have not gone up commensurately. So the life expectations of people are not as good as they were when I was younger, and that's something that people have to face. Nothing I can do about that.
So Dave, the next question: how do we find meaning and purpose in life, and also to what extent has your experience in teaching affected your perspective?
I don't believe there is a purpose to life. I don't believe, life is whatever you live. You simply live. It's quite often words appear to be opposites, and they're not. I don't think that meaningful and meaningless are opposites. I think feeling that your life is meaningless is a problem. I would hate to be in that situation that I felt like my life had no purpose and no meaning. At the same time, I do not go through life thinking about what the purpose of my life is. I live my life, and as long as I don't feel alienated, don't feel miserable, displaced, and so on, I'm content. So to me, it's not about the search for meaning. It's about avoiding the sense of meaninglessness, avoiding that sense of alienation, or anomie, as Durkheim called it. That's what's important. It's avoiding the very negative sentiments that can be associated with life. My life has no meaning, my life has no purpose, I'm not happy, and so on. That's the kind of thing you need to avoid. You don't necessarily need to be in a desperate search for a wonderful life. Life is to some extent just routine. It's ordinary enough. It's about simply finding your position in it and being as happy as you reasonably can be in whatever position you find yourself in. Yeah, I mean, I very much think that it's not about maximizing the wonder of life. That's not, for the most part, what most people are about. Most people's concerns and interests are fairly prosaic. What am I going to eat tonight? Where are we going on holiday? Can we afford to pay the mortgage? And so on. But as long as the answer to those questions is something nice, a nice place, and yes, we can, that's okay. That's enough. Yeah. It's the point at which you're thinking, it's not enough. I'm unhappy. I can't see any point in what I do. I hate my colleagues. I hate my wife. I hate my kids. Whatever, that's where people have problems. And I think if we possibly can, we want to avoid that.
Awesome.
Well, it's kind of like there's such a thing as clinical depression, and clinical depression is a biological condition. I don't want to talk about that, but you can be depressed for a reason. You can be depressed because bad things happen. And by and large, I would want to avoid, as much as I possibly can, the bad things happening.
Yeah. Because Dave, I remember when I was 17, when I was just sat in the corridor waiting for my teachers to come. I had really good rapport with my college teachers, and I remember on the last, it was like a Friday at I think 3 or 4 o'clock. I turned up for my sociology lesson, and it was the Friday before the Easter holidays. So I knocked on the door and I said to my teacher, John, I thought we got class, no one's turned up. And he's laughing and he said, I didn't expect anyone to turn up on the last Friday of the Easter holidays. But I had really good rapport with my teachers, and so he helped me do some assignment work. But I remember I sat in the corridor and I thought, I've such respect for my teachers, and I thought I want to go into teaching, maybe get the qualification whilst I can, and then even if I go back to it later on. And the core reason was to help people. So for me, the reason for doing my job, really, I think it could be summed up to help people, really. I know it sounds cheesy, but that for me is my motivation.
Yeah, I mean, I understand that. I tend towards the view that there's never a single motivation for what we do. We're motivated by many things, but I certainly like the feeling, always like the feeling that my students appreciate me, they like me, they know that I care about them, that I am helpful, and so on. I always knew that that's mainly what my students thought about me, and that gives you a good feeling, yeah. And it is a motivation if you can go into work feeling that other people appreciate you. that's a good feeling. And I think it is a failure of management by and large that they're really not very good at showing appreciation for people. You know, and a lot of what we've been talking about is about intrinsic motivation, but you can be motivated extrinsically by other people. And I do think in organizational life, there is probably not enough encouragement. It's certainly true in academic life, because you are professional and you are pretty much expected to be entirely self-motivating. And I often feel that it would not be a bad thing if university managements made a little bit of effort to actually show that they appreciate what you do. I certainly felt that, if I was being honest, at MMU, that I never always felt that I was appreciated by the institution. I did feel that I was appreciated by my students. It's not an issue that applies to me now. I don't actually care much about what the institution thinks about me, because I work on a consultancy basis now. I care only about what my students and my colleagues think about me.
Yeah. Because even this interview, Dave, the interviews which we're having, because I was your student, so I respect and remembered all your lessons. So I think that's a good. You're saying about what the students think, is important, isn't it? And what the people around you.
Well, again, it's back to this avoiding the negative if you possibly can. Who the hell wants, especially as a teacher? Who the hell wants to go through life as a teacher thinking that your students hate you?
Yeah.
That they're contemptuous of you. You don't want to be one of those people where the students are talking about so-and-so, he's useless, yeah, or I hate her, and you do hear these things. I used to hear whispers of this kind when I was at MMU about colleagues that students would talk about, and I used to discourage it, obviously. I didn't want them to talk about it in front of me, but you hear these things.
Yeah.
And I always felt to myself, I really, really don't want to be one of those people.
There's an American guy called Brian Tracy, and I don't know if you've heard of him.
I have.
But he says that when our goals, values, and actions align with working towards a worthy ideal, it is a route towards achieving meaning and fulfillment. So, do you think this is true?
But to a certain extent. Again, it's a little bit individualistic. It implies that, as it were, you are responsible. You yourself are entirely responsible for outcomes, and that simply isn't true. You can feel that you know why you are doing what you do. You can feel that what you do is valuable, and you can act in a certain way and still be miserable because other people make you miserable. You can work in an institution or organizational context where whatever you feel about your value and so on, you are prevented from achieving the things you want to achieve for factors which are outside your control. So it's not entirely true. What I would say is that this kind of argument is more or less the opposite to well-known sociological arguments about unhappiness, for want of a better word. If you look at some of this, you will remember from criminology. If you look back at the classic strain theories, as they're called in criminology, Robert Merton and people of that kind, those people argued that not just criminality, but also certain other kinds of pathological behavior were caused by a disalignment between norms and values and so on, and the realities of social life. So Merton believed, in my view wrongly, but he believed that criminality was caused by sharing the same values as everybody else, those values meaning things like money, wanting to earn a living and so on, but being denied the opportunities. If the opportunities aren't there for you for reasons of social class, education and so on, then that would be a motivating factor to turn you towards crime. So strain theories, as they were called, they were very much about a disalignment between values and beliefs and action that, you know, denied certain kinds of opportunity and so on. So you can think of this particular view about how when they do align, this is the path to enlightenment, as it were, as the exact opposite.
Yeah.
I think there are flaws in both instances. The flaws are largely to do with the fact that in Merton's terms, it turns out that not every criminal is denied opportunity. White collar crime rather disproves the notion and so on. But also, as I've said, there are external factors, institutional factors, whatever your value commitments might be, which prevent you from ever achieving them. So I don't want to hold individuals entirely responsible for the outcomes in their lives.
Yeah.
I think you make certain choices. You can't always know whether they're the right choices. Sometimes they will turn out to be the wrong choices. But it's the absence of, I think where he's right is that it is the absence of this strain, this stress, that leads you to be more or less content with your life and more or less happy to do the things that you do. Yeah, it's not, the mistake I think is to think that life has to be relentlessly positive.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be like that. Most of the time it's just ordinary. You know, when I finish talking to you, I'm going to sit down and watch the new episode of Star Trek Discovery. Not because I'm, you know, obsessional about Star Trek, but hey, it's something to do. I'll sit down and watch an hour of a science fiction series contentedly. I won't be worried about whether, you know, this is what my life really means or not. This will just be what I do. It'll pass time, and it'll pass time agreeably enough. And I'm not worried about anything. I'm not stressed. Yeah, I'm not thinking, I don't know why I do what I do, and so on. It's the absence of the miseries that I think are motivating as much as anything else. So I partially agree that if your values and your attitudes align with your opportunities, then you will be a reasonably happy person. I partly agree with that.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting. Thanks. But do you think it's important to have goals, though, to have goals and to give yourself kind of deadlines towards achieving your goals with like a plan?
Not particularly. I think I'm in favour at some point in your life of having a plan. I think my early life was largely characterised by drift. I didn't have a plan, and certainly things changed for me when I made very conscious decisions instead of just drifting. So I think that's probably a good thing, to make yourself aware of the pathways there are in life and the decisions that you can make. But it's not quite the same thing as goal, I don't think. It's not goal in some huge sense. I mean, my goals are very modest. My goals this week were to get all my marking done by today. That's a goal, but it's a modest goal. Well, I achieved it. I think it is good to set goals that are achievable. There's no point in being unrealistic in the setting of goals. I think there's no real point in having what I would call long-term goals. You know, you should be stepwise in the way you progress through life. Excuse me, because there will always be setbacks anyway. There'll always be things that make you feel that things aren't quite going to plan and so on. So I would take the view that nothing wrong with goals, nothing wrong with plans, but they should always be modest and shouldn't stretch too far into the future.
Yeah. So Dave, just lastly, do you know these things which we've been talking about? Do you talk about these sort of things with your friends, in your social group? Do you talk about these sort of like life kind of topics?
No, not really. Almost all my friends are academics. Not quite, but almost all. Most of them are still, to a greater or lesser degree, working. Not necessarily paid work, but as you've already said, lots of academics carry on doing stuff even after they've retired. That's true of many of my friends. They carry on anyway. Of course, not all your commitments are work commitments. Family life is important to people, and it's not goal driven. You don't at the age of 50 plus, you can't think of your commitments to your family as entailing goals. I don't think they're about goals. They're more about the ordinary affections and loves that you find in families. No, we don't talk about that. We don't talk about the purpose of our lives and so on. I think we're all altogether more prosaic in the way we relate to each other. I can't remember the last time I had a conversation about the meaning of life, but I was probably 18.
Yeah. Okay, lovely. Well, thanks, Dave. For taking part in these interviews. Really enjoyed you taking part in this sociology mini series, and have you got any kind of closing comments before we wrap up, or anything you'd like to add?
Not especially. No. I mean, I don't like giving advice really, because people are individuals and they vary a lot. I would express a hope for people. I wouldn't want to give advice, but I would express a hope. I hope for young people that their lives turn out to be without the stresses and strains that afflict so many people. I hope that they find contentment in their work and in their emotional lives and so on. Because if you can be content, you don't need to be wondrously happy. If you can be content for most of your life, your life's been okay.
Okay. Well, Dave, I want to say thank you for joining us, for these interviews, and to the audience, thank you for watching. I hope you've enjoyed them. If you have any questions or comments, put it in the chat below. And until next time, we'll see you next time. Thank you. Bye bye.
Great. Bye bye.